Responsibilities Awareness Initiative. I am very happy to be with you today talking about an important topic for all of us in the workplace, including newcomers to Canada. So just a little bit about me. I've been working in human resources for nearly 20 years as a human resources professional. I've worn a number of different hats, from an in-house HR leader to a fractional consultant, and now really a specialist in workplace investigations. As a founder of Track Software, I help organizations and independent investigators navigate complex cases with clarity, compliance, and confidence through secure, intuitive case management software. So one of the things I really like doing is helping people understand the roles and responsibilities when it comes to investigations, when it comes to behavior in the workplace, and doing some training and development for individuals who are navigating the policies around violence and harassment prevention, and trying to develop training to help prevent incidents from occurring in their workplaces. So today I have a presentation for you with the purpose of it being to help newcomers understand Ontario's workplace safety expectations as they pertain to violence and harassment prevention. Because behaviors that may normally be acceptable in other cultures or other workplaces outside of Canada could be potentially unsafe, or even in some cases violate the law, which can lead to some serious misunderstandings and consequences for those individuals while at work. By covering this topic, we can help ensure that everyone can work confidently and help them avoid any misunderstandings and meet their legal responsibilities under Occupational Health and Safety Act. So here's our framework for today, a little bit of a roadmap on what we're going to talk about. So we're going to discuss what the rights and responsibilities are under the Occupational Health and Safety Act for Ontario. We're also going to talk about what the definition is when it comes to harassment and violence in the Occupational Health and Safety Act. We're going to talk a little bit about prevention and reporting, as well as the employer obligations. And then we're going to talk about how you can protect yourself at work from any allegations against you in the workplace when it comes to these topics. And then we're going to share a couple of quick takeaways and some resources that might be useful to individuals in this area. So we have a number of rights under the Occupational Health and Safety Act as employees. So we have the right to know essentially about the hazards in the workplace and anything that could cause harm to their health and safety. That can include things like chemicals, equipment, or processes, workplace violence risks, which is pertinent to our conversation today, and policies and procedures around safety, which includes violence and harassment prevention, which is what we're really going to focus on today. And employers must provide training and information on how workers can maintain their safety while at work. So they also have a right to participate, which is they have the right to be involved in conversations around health and safety and their health and safety in the workplace. So this is pertaining to reporting hazards, suggesting safety improvements, and participating in health and safety committees. This also pertains to reporting incidents of workplace violence or harassment in the workplace. So there are reporting procedures that all workplaces need to provide to the workers on how they can essentially report those incidents while in the workplace. They also have the right to refuse unsafe work. So if they believe that work is dangerous to themselves or someone else, they can refuse to do it until it is investigated. That includes physical dangers. It also includes violence or threat of violence and equipment that is unsafe. The employer must investigate these work refusals, and they must do so without punishment to the worker who brings them. So, which leads to the fourth right, which is the right to be free from reprisal. Workers cannot be punished for their health and safety rights, for using their health and safety rights, which means they cannot be, as an employee, you cannot be terminated for bringing up a health and safety concern. They can't cut your hours as a result of bringing up a health and safety concern, or discipline you, threaten you, or treat you unfairly as a result of raising concerns about the hazards in your workplace. Additionally, as it pertains to workplace harassment and violence, if an employee does bring up an allegation of this, they cannot take any of those actions against a worker for bringing up concerns or complaints or allegations of harassment or violence in the workplace. So those are the employees' rights. So what does that all mean? Essentially, that means that you have a responsibility as an employee within a workplace to follow the health and safety rules that have been provided to you by your employer. The employer has an obligation to train you on all of the policies and procedures that pertain to health and safety and your workplace, so that you can essentially follow those and keep yourself safe while work there. That all said, what that means is that the employer will train you on violence and harassment prevention, as they are required to do by the Occupational Health and Safety Act. And then so your responsibility is to know those policies and make sure that your own behavior is free from anything that could be a violation of those policies. And usually the training will entail not only the definitions of violence and harassment, it will provide you with information around the reporting procedures for anyone that is subject to harassment or a violent incident, and what the investigation procedures would be by the organization to help resolve those situations. So that's what essentially those rights and how they work in the workplace. We're just going to talk a little bit about the definition of harassment and violence in the workplace as according to the Occupational Health and Safety Act for Ontario. Each jurisdiction within Canada will have its own provincial legislation that will define these terms, which might be slightly different. But today we're going to focus on Ontario. So the Ontario definition is engaging in a course of vexatious comment or conduct against a worker in a workplace that is known or ought reasonably to be known to be unwelcome, or workplace sexual harassment or sexual harassment. So that's the definition. And so when you're looking at the term known or ought reasonably to be known, there are certain words or phrases within that every person would know that would not be appropriate for the workplace. And then, of course, there are topics or phrases or things that individuals might be sensitive to, or that might be triggering for them in the workplace. And if they make it known to you that your comment or behavior is unwelcome, and you continue to engage in that behavior, it can cross the threshold to harassment. So we're really looking at two things there. One is where somebody makes it known to you that what you're doing or saying is problematic, and crosses at the threshold for them. And then the other part is what you ought reasonably to be known. So, of course, there are some things that we all know: engaging in racial slurs, sexist commentary, things like that in the workplace. Every person ought reasonably to know that those would be inappropriate for the workplace. Some other examples of harassment could be verbal or written, threats, abusive language, intimidating phone calls, socially excluding or isolating someone from meetings on purpose, persistent criticism, calling someone's convictions or private life into question, or damaging their belongings. Then when it comes, and we'll talk a little bit in a minute about sexual harassment in specific. And just breaking down the definition just a little bit further. So a course of conduct essentially refers to behavior that happens more than once. Vexatious means that it's annoying, it's distressing or upsetting, and not just mildly irritating. It is actually a little bit more than just being mildly irritating. And comment or conduct means anything that is said, written, or done in the workplace. And we talked about a couple of examples. So just covering what ought reasonably to be known to be unwelcome again. This means that you either know or a reasonable person should know that the behavior is welcome, even if no one has said it to you directly. So again, just that differentiation between somebody making it known to you and then what you should know. So if a coworker looks uncomfortable or avoids you when you make particular jokes, that's a signal something is unwelcome. So we should be paying attention to social cues in the workplace. And then again, if you were told once to stop a certain time of comment, continuing it later could essentially cross the threshold to harassment. We talked a little bit about this. So spreading rumors, insults, or ridicule could also result in accusation of harassment, and interfering with another worker's ability to do their job. Again, by excluding them, preventing access to resources, or undermining them with colleagues. This could also include practical jokes, like taking away things that they need to do their jobs. If they have to use a particular piece of equipment or machinery and you're always hiding it or moving it away from them or taking it from them, that could essentially, over time, that kind of behavior could potentially lead to allegations of harassment if it interferes with their ability to do their jobs. So here is just some examples of sexual harassment, and this is important because this is also specifically defined in the Occupational Health and Safety Act, and it refers to any unwelcome behavior of a sexual nature, which includes remarks about someone's body or clothing, requests for sexual favors, which also then is linking job benefits to engaging in sexual conduct in the workplace or trying to get their compliance to engage in sexual conduct in the workplace. Unwanted touching, hugging, or close physical contact with an individual that could include violating their personal space, touching them inappropriately. It could also include displaying sexual images or sending inappropriate messages using any methodology, whether it's email, text messaging, WhatsApp, Snapchat, those types of things, and suggesting that someone's job depends on them accepting your advance. The final phrase emphasizes that harassment can be sexual or non-sexual. Both are violations of the Occupational Health and Safety Act. So we've kind of covered two. So just a summary example of something that would constitute sexual harassment and be a violation of Ontario law would be, for example, if a supervisor or coworker is repeatedly making jokes about another worker's clothing or body type or how they look and sends them personal messages after hours or during the workday, this could be considered a course of vexatious conduct that ought reasonably to be known to be unwelcome. So that covers the harassment definition. So let's move on to violence. So this part of the law defines what counts as workplace violence in Ontario under the Occupational Health and Safety Act. And it includes the three main categories: actual physical force, attempted physical force, and threats of physical force. So the actual definition is the exercise of physical force by a person against a worker that causes or could cause physical injury. It also includes an attempt to exercise physical force or a statement or behavior that a worker could reasonably interpret as a threat to use physical force in the workplace. This includes verbal threats, physical attacks, and even threatening behavior like shaking a fist. So we're going to just break that down into everyday language. So essentially, the exercise of physical force by a person against a worker that could cause physical injury. This is any act where someone uses physical force on a worker, even if no injury actually occurs. So it also applies if the action could have caused injury. So it may not have caused injury, but examples of this would be hitting, punching, slapping, or kicking, pushing someone into a wall or blocking their movement aggressively. It could be sticking out your foot and potentially trying to trip someone, throwing objects at someone, even if it misses them, or grabbing or shaking a coworker. Even one incident counts. It does not need to be repeated for it to be considered to workplace violence. So violence does not only apply when the force is completed. It is also considered when a worker tries, or if someone tries to push, strike, or hit a worker. So that would still qualify as workplace violence under the Occupational Health Safety Act. So examples would be, as we just mentioned, shaking a fist, or raising a hand as if to slap someone, swinging a fist but missing, trying to shove someone but being stopped, or charging or lunging at a coworker, even if you did not make contact. A statement or behavior that a worker could reasonably interpret as a threat to use physical force, and this is one of the most important parts. A worker does not need to be touched for an incident to qualify. So if a person says or does something that a reasonable person could interpret as a threat or could be seen as threatening, it counts as workplace violence. So some examples of this: saying, "I'm going to hit you," or "you'll regret this," implying that something is going to happen. Again, just going back to shaking a fist at someone, stepping aggressively into someone's personal space, threatening to deal with somebody outside of the workplace, slamming objects on a desk to intimidate, and sending threatening messages. Those could all be reasonably interpreted as a threat, which means if an average person would feel threatened, it would fall under workplace violence, even if the person making the threat later claims that they didn't really mean it and somebody should have known that they didn't mean it. So on this slide, we also have a little illustration of a horse. And the reason that we have included that is because there is a section of the Workplace Health and Safety Act that actually specifically refers to horseplay. The way it's defined under the Act is that any worker shall not engage in any prank, contest, feat of strength, unnecessary running, or rough and boisterous conduct. So that essentially, it doesn't specifically say horseplay, but essentially it covers it by the meaning: roughhousing, jumping on coworkers, playing tricks, throwing objects, even if it's in a joking manner, scaring or surprising coworkers. Those are all things that could be the intention was just joking around, pushing in each other for fun, but it can be considered workplace violence in the workplace if a worker engages in this type of behavior. So we're going to talk in a minute about how to protect yourself at work, but this is really important to know that engaging in this behavior is an actual violation of the Occupational Health and Safety Act when it comes to your safety. So if the joking involves any type of physical force, attempted physical force, because remember, we just saw that definition about what physical force is, and then of course threats of force, it can be legally considered to be workplace violence, even if the person says, "We were just playing around." So examples, again, pretending to punch someone as shoving someone as a joke, throwing tools or items towards someone, blocking somebody's path aggressively. So again, just reiterating some of those things that could potentially be problematic when in the workplace. So we talked a lot about the definitions, what can be considered under those definitions. So now we want to move on to prevention and reporting. So I mentioned very early on that it is the employer's responsibility to educate all of their workers on violence and harassment prevention and their policies that pertain to those in the workplace. So they must provide you not just training on the policy, but also on how to prevent it, as well as how to report it and what your duties as a worker are on this topic while you're employed by them. So usually an employer will have very clear reporting guidelines on who you need to go to. So typically in most circumstances, your first point of contact would be your supervisor. However, if it is your supervisor that's engaging in the conduct, then you will want to go to the next level of management or to human resources in order to bring forward your complaint. The process of a workplace violence and harassment investigation and it should be stated in the is confidential. That does not mean it is anonymous or that all of your details are going to be kept confidential. If you raise an allegation, it is the requirement of the workplace to provide details of the allegation to the respondent, whoever that may be. That could potentially include your information, so just be aware of that when you are in a situation like this, is that the employer has a duty to investigate all complaints, but they also have to engage in procedural fairness with anybody who is bringing up allegations and who is a respondent in allegations in the workplace. So that's important to know. And on top of that, as we mentioned, it is your right to be free from any retaliation. So if you raise a complaint of harassment or violence in good faith in the workplace, you should not receive any retaliation from the employer for doing so. And we talked about what some of those examples of retaliation could look like. There are a lot of differences between Canadian culture and other cultures around the world when it comes to how we interact while at work. Some of those cultural differences could be due to societal norms around who works with whom. There could be some countries where there is not a lot of gender diversification in the workplace, or even ethnic diversification in the workplace. And so different rules may apply in your home country, in your work culture in your home country. So it's really important to understand what Canadian norms are. And when you receive that training from your employer around what's appropriate in the workplace and what the policies are, it's really important to conduct a personal assessment. Okay, so what was work like in my home country culture? And what would be different from there to here? And how do I need to adjust my behavior in order to make sure that I am safe and free from allegations in the workplace? And so we're going to talk a little bit about how you can protect yourself while you're at the workplace. A lot of the times over the course of my history in investigating workplace allegations of harassment, not as many violent ones, but workplace allegations of harassment tend to have made up the bulk of my investigations. And it usually comes down to either not following the company policy, not following the company policy, but not necessarily understanding the company policy as it pertains to certain behaviors, because things are different from their previous experience. So we all have different gauges of what is appropriate outside of the workplace, what we find funny, how we might engage with our family and friends. So it is very important for the workplace to establish the rules around what is appropriate so that we can all then govern our behavior according to those definitions and the behavior that is required in the workplace. So first thing you need to do is really understand what the company policy is. Make sure you attend and understand the training. If you don't, or something is very different from your previous experience, I would encourage you to ask questions, to speak up, to get clarification so that you can have a better understanding of what is expected of you when it comes to your behavior in that particular workplace. So, and again, we also mentioned assessing your personal behaviors that you might engage in outside of work to what is expected from you in the workplace. And if there is a difference, making sure that you don't bring those over into your workplace and potentially put yourself at risk of an allegation of harassment. So just a couple of do's and don'ts when it comes to behavior in the workplace. But actually, before we get into that, I am actually just going to go back to some more tips around protecting yourself. It's really important to be polite and clear when you're speaking with your coworkers. Maintaining professionalism and keeping your requests or the way in which you ask for things in the workplace is polite. We wouldn't want to just say, hey, do this, and be very direct and aggressive in our communication with a fellow coworker, you want to include some appropriate pleasantries like, could you please, would you mind, I really need you to do X instead of just go and do this. So it's a little different in being in the way in which you communicate in the workplace. Another one is maintaining your personal space, understanding from other people what is their personal space. In other cultures, there might not be a requirement for a high degree of personal space, depending on the culture you are coming from. But in Canada, for the most part, we want to respect personal space between ourselves and our coworkers. We want to leave a couple of feet, maybe even 3 feet between ourselves and our coworker when we're engaging in conversation with them. Anything less than that might feel like you're encroaching on them, and it might, depending on the nature of the conversation, it could feel intimidating. It could feel that you're violating a boundary, different things like that. I mentioned that some countries that you might be coming from, they might have different rules about how genders engage with each other in the workplace. In Canada, women and men have equal authority and roles at all levels of organizations. So it's really important to be aware of that and make sure you govern your behavior appropriately. It is appropriate in Canadian culture to make eye contact with both men and women and people of all genders in the workplace, and avoid any type of gender-based commentary or making assumptions about whether or not something is beyond their capabilities because of their gender. It's really important to make sure that you don't include any of that type of commentary in the workplace. Hierarchies tend to be a little bit flatter in Canadian organizations. So there isn't as much of an expectation that you have to wait for direction from a manager before speaking. It is encouraged in Canadian workplace culture to speak up, to ask questions, to ask for clarity. It is appropriate to respectfully share suggestions or concerns with supervisors. And it would be welcomed if you're saying, oh, I have an idea that might improve this process. Those kind of things would be welcomed in Canadian workplaces. Want to be inclusive. If you are from a mixed language group and you are in a mixed language workplace, it would be important to show that you are trying to be inclusive by speaking the language of the workplace. Obviously, if you're working with other coworkers that speak your home country language, you might be inclined to speak to them in that language. However, if you're in a shared space with other coworkers that do not speak the language, it would be encouraged to speak the language of the workplace so that other people don't feel excluded as a result. And you don't have to do that 100% of the time, but also just making sure that you are being inclusive and make sure that you're not deliberately trying to exclude someone while trying to also maybe continue to respect your culture and connect with people from your culture in a way that is meaningful for you. So it's just something to be mindful of. Listen actively. Interrupting people while they're speaking is often viewed as disrespectful. So you might want to wait for a pause before speaking to show that you're listening or nodding by using short acknowledgments like I understand or that makes sense. Avoid making assumptions. In some country cultures, being friendly or offering people compliments on their body or their dress might be a way that is considered to build rapport. In Canada, this can be misinterpreted as personal or romantic interest. So it's really important to keep any compliments that you're going to give your coworkers appropriate to the circumstance. So you might want to, if you're trying to compliment a coworker on their work or what they have done, you could actually try a different way. So by saying like, you handle that client interaction really well, or I really liked how you asked that question in the company meeting, instead of complimenting them on their attire, their body type, things like that. Use positive language in order to frame things constructively. So in some country cultures, you might be very direct and problem focused. So instead of just blurting out that's not going to work or that's a bad idea. It might be better to say maybe we can try it a different way, or I'm not sure that that's going to work in this circumstance, and here's why. So a little bit different approach in how you frame your conversation with your colleagues or your coworkers. And I did mention personal space. In some cultures, hugs or cheek kisses may be typical greetings, even in workplaces. In Canada, those are usually reserved for very close friends or family, not necessarily colleagues. Typically, in a workplace, a handshake or a friendly verbal greeting is appropriate in nearly all professional settings. And it's also very important to not interpret friendly greetings or smiles from your coworkers as a personal or romantic interest. Those would be cultural norms in the Canadian workplace, to be friendly and polite with your coworkers, to engage in greetings when you see someone. Those types of behaviors would be typical things that you'd see in a Canadian workplace and would not necessarily convey personal or romantic interest from a coworker or a colleague. So then just a couple of do's and don'ts when it comes to governing your behavior in the workplace. So just to reiterate, respecting boundaries is really important. So avoid any unnecessary physical contact. Keep professional conversations focused on work topics rather than personal or romantic subjects. And observe how other people in your workplace interact. If most keep a physical distance or avoid touch, then follow that norm. Like be an observer, especially when you start in a new workplace. That's going to give you the most information about the culture of that particular workplace and what is appropriate, along with their policies and procedures. So be an observer. If people are engaging in you know, a very professional language, then you're going to want to engage in very professional language. If people avoid unnecessary touch, then you're going to want to do that too. So it's very important to respect those boundaries. So communicate professionally, we already talked about that, but even in written messages, language barriers and tones can differ, and those cause misunderstandings. So sometimes if we keep our language professional for the workplace, that can really help. Something said jokingly or with warmth in one culture can sound disrespectful or aggressive in another. So if you keep your messages clear and neutral, avoid sarcasm, slang, or humor that could be misinterpreted. Use work email and messaging tools for job-related communication. When you're giving feedback, focus on the facts. The report, for example, the report was late versus opinions, which is you're unreliable. Well, so this is just a different way in which we're approaching that situation. Always think before hitting send. If you're frustrated, upset, or annoyed about a particular situation at work, you've banged out a quick email, always good idea to take a pause before you hit the send button and assume your messages can be shared or reviewed later. Even personal messages, texting with coworkers outside of work, we often develop friendships with the people that we work with. Just keep in mind that anything we send to a coworker, even if it's outside of the workplace, could later be used against you if that relationship goes sideways and all of a sudden you're not friends anymore and you are engaging in conduct that would be a violation of your company policy. You want to make sure that you're protected by just avoiding that behavior in the first place. In some cultures, using nicknames or friendly teasing can build connection. In Canada, a remark like, "You're too slow today," might sound demeaning rather than playful. And depending on any nicknames or things like that you might use in the workplace, that could be potentially be a problem for the people receiving that. So again, just going back to what that definition is, what's known or ought reasonably be to be known. So if for some reason you're using a nickname in the workplace or you've decided to call a coworker something other than their name, and they've indicated to you that that's problematic for them or they don't like it or they want you to stop, you want to make sure you listen to that coworker and change your behavior so that an allegation doesn't come up against you later. And then the other thing I would say is document incidents when they occur. If something does happen in your workplace where somebody has said something to you and they're like, "Hey, you need to stop saying that to me," make a note of it. make a note of what they said, what the incident was, and keep that for your own records. And make sure that you adhere to the respecting that coworker's wishes for the future, but at least make a note of it. And then also, then you have that later. If something comes up, you're like, actually, you know what? So-and-so asked me not to say that on this date. And from then on, I've been respecting that and making every effort not to uh, essentially engage in that behavior any further. So make notes of those things for your own records, because those could be helpful later on if you're ever accused of anything. And then some don'ts. Don't make jokes that are inappropriate or violations of the company policies. So don't send inappropriate personal messages. If somebody indicates to you that they're no longer interested, maybe you have developed a romantic interest for somebody at work, they've indicated to you that they're actually not interested. You want to make sure you respect that and do not follow up and keep asking them for a date or keep trying to engage with them in a romantic way, because that could potentially lead to an allegation of harassment. And then also, don't react emotionally. If you are on the receiving end of an allegation, or somebody has made a request to you to stop engaging in a behavior that they find offensive or triggering or bothers them, or they find it irritating, then take a pause. Take a moment to breathe and try not to get defensive. And I know it can be a stressful situation, but if you feel upset, then maybe just let them know, okay, well, I'd like to just take a quick break and continue the discussion in a few minutes. Go away for a minute, think about how you want to respond, and how you want to take the feedback that they're saying for what it's worth. It's that this is an opportunity that somebody is giving you for you to understand how your behavior impacts them. It may or may not be reasonable, but if you take a moment to think about it, take from the feedback the nuggets of truth that are important, determine whether or not your behavior could be construed as a violation of any of the company policies. Focus on the issue, not the person. And use calm statements like, I would like to understand this a little bit better. Can you tell me a little bit more about why you find this frustrating or what the issue is? I'd like to come up with a solution on how we can improve this situation. And then if you are in doubt, you're not sure how to handle it, seek speaking with your supervisor or manager, or of course, with human resources before emotions can get out of hand. Those types of situations can always be a little bit stressful, so there's nothing wrong with asking for a little help in navigating those. And just make sure you follow what the protocols are for your organization in terms of who you report to and when you should do so. And the reporting guidelines that you're trained on, you can always go back and get a refresher on what those say. So just adjusting to a new workplace culture can be stressful. It can require a lot of change depending on what your previous experience was. So it can take a little bit of time. So observe what the norms are of the organization. That is going to give you the greatest insight into the culture of that particular organization. Again, ask questions for clarification, ask questions about processes, or ask for more training if you need it for more understanding. Build relationships with colleagues that are positive professionals and professional and that respect boundaries, and stay positive and adaptable. None of us are perfect. There's nothing wrong with getting a little bit of feedback and adjusting our behavior to help us acclimatize a little bit better to our current situation and to make sure that we're successful and safe in our workplace and that everybody is respected. So key takeaways from today. So hopefully after this, you have a little bit better understanding of what your rights are. You have a little bit more understanding about Canadian workplace culture and how we can communicate respectfully within it. Just a reminder to keep some notes around any situations that are emotionally charged, any that where that has been something of conflict that occurred in the workplace. Document what occurred, what you're doing about it, and anything else that is relevant to that particular situation. Respect boundaries, and stay professional. If you do all of those things, you should be well protected in the workplace from any allegations that could be raised against you from a harassment and violence perspective. And again, here are some, I will say though, just if you're struggling with any of those things, there are resources in your organization. You can go and speak with your supervisor, your manager, or human resources to ask for more information or help or more clarity. So that might be your first stop when it comes to dealing with these types of situations. First point of contact, but there are also other resources out there that could be helpful to you in navigating adapting to a new culture. And of course, the London Cross-Cultural Learning Centre, they have lots of great resources there. South London Neighbourhood Resource Centre, Northwest London Resource Centre, there's Will Employment Connections, and Salvation Army Centre of Hope. And then from an occupational health and safety standpoint, there's so many resources out there, but here are some good ones. Obviously, the Ministry of Labour has a lot of information and also guides around violence and harassment prevention. There is some guides around understanding the Occupational Health and Safety Act available online as well as some training around your rights at work. There's also the Human Rights Commission and then the Canadian Centre of Occupational Health and Safety. So there is lots of information out there and available to you if you seek it. So again, if you have experienced harassment or violence in the workplace, report it to your supervisor, your manager, or human resources. And then again, seek these links and additional resources for support for health and safety at work. I hope this presentation has been helpful to you. If you have any other questions, my name is Samantha Carter. I am, again, a human resources consultant and workplace investigator. I can be reached at samantha@hrtraction.com. And, or you can reach out to Heatham with any questions and he can pass them along to me. As always, it has been a pleasure providing you with this information, and I hope I get an opportunity to do so again in the future.